Hello and welcome to the Anonymous Weeb, your one-stop shop for everything Chainsaw Man. In today's video we are going to be discussing if devils have a base or primitive form, but before that, I'd like to remind you that if you want a constant flow of Chainsaw Man content into your YouTube recommended, then hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. But now let's get on with the video. So, what is it exactly that I mean when saying, do devils have a base form? Well, while having a conversation with a commenter by the name of Very Harry on my previous video, I began to wonder if the forms we see every single devil in the series in, is one that is either chosen by them or the result of how those around them perceive their fear. As for instance, why does the Blood Devil appear as a strange feline creature? Or why does the Eternity Devil appear as a mass of twisted flesh? Well, if my hypothesis is correct, those aren't the form of the devil themselves but rather just a sort of shell for their true forms. Of course, I don't expect you to just up and agree with me based upon just that alone. No, I have found some rather interesting evidence which I think you might find very, very interesting. The first piece of evidence I have to support this theory is Pochita, the lovable little chainsaw doggo, from the beginning of the series, and who is the driving force behind almost everything in the series. If you can all cast your minds back to the first chapters, before Pochita became fused with Denji, back to when he was a devil with his own body rather than being fused with a human. Back then Pochita appeared as a small dog with a chainsaw nose and a ripcord tail. But we already know from later on in the series that this isn't the form which Pochita originally takes, as he is referred to as Chainsaw Man and presumably appeared as he did when Denji went berserk with his power. But we also see something interesting when Pochita fused with Denji. We see the dog body meld into his chest, leaving behind the ripcord tail on his chest, but notable he doesn't take on any features of a dog. Rather his body is pulled back together by a mass of wires and chains, so perhaps the Chainsaw Devil's original, base form is a mass of wires covered in chainsaw teeth. It seems a lot more appropriate for a devil made to embody the fear of chainsaws to be made up of the most dangerous parts of chainsaw. I will admit this is certainly one of the weaker pieces of evidence, but I do have more to go on than just that. For instance, take Power, the lovable Blood Devil, who we have had the pleasure of spending most of the series with and will likely play a key part in the story going forwards in a less direct manner. When we first meet her, and indeed for most of the time we get to spend with her, she is a fiend, a devil taking on the corpse of another being, in this case a human, so already this isn't her original form, rather just a guise that she puts on. For what reason she became a fiend is unknown, but presumably the original Blood Devil was injured to a point that they need to fuse with a human corpse to survive. We later see the Blood Devil form, the one in which Power appears as a sort of feline monster creature that is also vaguely humanoid in shape, but before that we see Power within a black void with Pochita, apparently within Denji's body, or soul, or wherever they were, because Power's being was tied to the blood she had given him. When she returns, it's from the blood which Denji had consumed, so I am positing that the Blood Devil's true form is just an amorphous mass of blood capable of taking on various shapes based upon the hardening of the blood, as we see with the blood weapons that Power created. Considering that we see Power literally form out of the blood and the blood contains the very essence of her entire being, I'd say this is pretty solid evidence for the base form of the Blood Devil being blood itself. Continuing on with Devil, which likewise show that they have a baser form, we have Typhoon, the strange giant creature with a swirling mass of brain matter. Yeah, that form really doesn't bring forth the idea of a typhoon with his appearance alone, even less so than Power's apparent devil form, which likewise doesn't summon up thoughts of blood till we see its abilities. But before this lumbering form gets revealed, we see Typhoon in a much more, I'd argue, fitting appearance, as a swirling mass of water, or just a mighty typhoon itself, as it traps Riz and Denji in the school and is capable of communicating without issue to Riz, and to the assassin who was working with or for Typhoon. It should also be noted that, it was in this form where Typhoon displayed the greatest level of control over the weather when compared to his gigantic form, so I'd say that true to his nature as the Typhoon Devil, He is far more at home being in the form of a mighty storm and only took on that rather cumbersome form because its space form is not suited to actual combat, or at least not the sort of combat which would have assisted Reese. But moving on from him and his creepy giant baby creature thing, so instead let's move on to a writhing mass of flesh in the Eternity Devil. The Eternity Devil is of course the devil which embodies the fear of eternity, yet how does a twisted mass of flesh demonstrate that? It doesn't. What does however is the way in which the hotel that it resides in became a twisted space, an unending space that just continues to loop around on itself for an eternity. Also, it should be noted that the Eternity Devil didn't actually get killed because of the harm done to its physical body but rather because it gave up from the pain, which was inflicted upon it by Denji, presenting its gore so that it could be finished off and escape from the pain, further suggesting that the horrible mass of flesh was in fact not its most basic form. So, I'd say that the Eternity Devil originally would be a less solid construct and more the embodiment of a space or time where it traps those within itself, meaning that for a time the hotel was at least in part, the Eternity Devil itself. And finally we come to perhaps the most damning evidence that devils might indeed have a more primal form than the ones we typically get to see, the Darkness Devil, who makes its appearance as a literal pool of darkness falling from one of the doors in hell only to reconstitute itself into the more typical form we see it in. It also emerges from darkness on earth, and when granting a piece of itself to Santa, it isn't a mass of its more vaguely human-shaped body but instead a mass of pure darkness. So I would say that pretty much confirms right there that the devil's base form is just darkness itself. But with all that evidence, I'd like to hear about what you think. Do devils have a base form which they then shape into whatever form they decide to appear in? Do the shapes of devils change in response to the fear of the population, so the devil's form is determined by an unconscious consensus of the human species? I'm not certain if this is a thing, but I found it interesting enough to make a video on it, so I'd like to think you guys would find it interesting enough to comment on it and start up a discussion between ourselves. I've been the Anonymous Weeb and I wish you a good day or night wherever you might be.